So it's like, I mean, maybe some of us could ride the bicycle on the first time we tried, but for most of us, me included, we couldn't. And, you fall off enough times until you get it. Meditation is no different. The falling off will be boredom, feeling upset, feeling angry, as you process whatever is coming up. And that's what is supposed to happen. People think when that happens, they can't meditate. Actually, they're meditating correctly.
Good morning, Guru Dharam. It is so lovely to have you here on the Light Dump. You are my dearest friend and teacher, and I want to introduce you to this community here as the powerhouse you are in Kundalini Yoga and meditation, and of course how you combine the other studies that you've done into indigenous healing, Kabbalah, Mesoamerican Shamanic Dreaming, West African and White Lotus. Gosh, there's so many. I really don't know how many there are that you've dived into, but I'd love to hear about it. And today you join us from Chile, Sweden. Is that where you're
Indeed.
based? Is that where you're based now?
I've been based in Sweden for the last 15, 16 years, Susie, yeah.
Wow. I mean, I met you back in the UK, right back in the day. It was,
It
I would
was
have,
back in the day.
I want to say, I think it was 1994, something like that.
That sounds
95.
about right. That's
Yeah,
the Unitarian Chapel in Hampstead.
somewhere like that. Yes, and although there were several little spaces. There was that dance studio that we would go and practice in as well. And
Oh,
yeah, and it was interesting
that's right, yeah.
because my first foray into Kundalini Yoga was not actually with you. It was with Andrea Levison, but she had to go back to
Okay.
America, so she passed me on to you very quickly.
Yeah.
And I was pretty hooked by this practice, and for various reasons, it was very different. But what I found was that provided it provided. It
Yeah.
actually took me to a place I'd never thought about before. So in a way, it was the kickoff for my spiritual journey, and you've
Mm.
been very much part of that. But let's go back to earlier days with you. And am I correct? You were studying drama, and before you even got into this. So tell us what that journey was for you.
Yeah, that's right. Way back, that was my first training. I trained at East 15 Drama School in East London.
And
And then
what made you go on to Kundalini Yoga from there? Why did you segue that way?
because I just happened to find Kundalini Yoga as a practice, and I found it really resonated with me. Um, and so within a year of me learning and practicing Kundalini Yoga, I began teaching. And all of that just really sort of took off and sort of replaced my work in the theatre and TV. So I'd kind of got to the point as an actor where I'd been doing fringe theatre, and then doing TV, Doctor Who, The Bill, Dempsey and Makepeace, kind of standard TV stuff. Got into the yoga. The yoga was kind of, it took me, I suppose, in a different direction. And that's what happened.
What
And
was it?
because,
Oh, sorry. What was it that intrigued you about this practice?
well, I think really a bit like you said, it sort of seemed to feed me at a very deep level. And that was an experience that there was sort of no way I was going to walk away from. And so I just kind of kept up with it. And it sort of, developed into a whole, well, actually, of course, it developed into a whole part of my life story because that was like 40 years, that was nearly 40 years ago.
You were based in London, but did you learn Kundalini Yoga there? Was that where
Yeah.
you found it?
When I began, there was, as far as I remember, like, it was tiny. It was like maybe three or four teachers in the whole of London. It's a really, really small scene. And that was back in the day when, yoga was for hippies. If you did yoga, you were a hippie, and it was very fringe. So it was way before yoga became kind of cool and sexy and all that stuff.
But you went on to just tell us a little bit about that because you went on to work with Yogi Bhajan. You found your teacher, if you like,
Yeah, I
working
did.
with him.
For me, my main interest in yoga was its sort of healing potential. And so I wanted to develop that at a kind of different level, at a professional level. At the time in the UK, there wasn't a professional level Ayurvedic training. So I could have gone to India for 7 years, learnt the language for one, and then done a kind of training. But that wasn't really going to happen for me. But I did find a course in acupuncture. And so I did that. And then I found a course in Chinese herbal medicine and did that concurrently. Um, and for me, what was fascinating was the kind of, if you like, cross fertilization or kind of cross illumination, how each one of those two disciplines kind of informed the other in ways that I found totally fascinating. To the point where, fast forward to first time, I think it was 2007, when I did the first Kundalini Yoga teacher, Kundalini Yoga therapy training course, which basically arose from me working with people one to one, putting on my kind of Chinese medicine goggles and then putting on my Kundalini Yoga goggles and, cross referencing.
And you've been teaching the practice and Kundalini Yoga therapy now for a long time. Um, how did you become a teacher? Because it was a bit different back then, wasn't it? Rather than teacher training
Oh, yeah.
as we
So,
know it now. Yeah.
yeah, the training that you did and the sort of training that most people have done, say, over the last 10 or 15 years, of course, the trainings are different, but they tend to be like a kind of 200-hour foundation course. That's, pretty standard. But when I started, they didn't exist. And I mean, the Kundalini sort of ethos was, what you've learnt today, you teach to somebody else tomorrow. Now, of course, it wasn't quite like that, but looking back on it, one had to have quite a sort of serious enthusiasm to go out there and teach. But I found myself in that sort of scenario, and I mean, even in the early days when I first started teaching, it must have been 24, so about 1970, 71, there were loads of people coming to class. And, that built and built and built really all the way up to, 4 or 5 years ago when we had the COVID hiatus.
Mm-hmm.
So it's rather
Mm-hmm.
like we've seen, and you, of course, you were a part of it. Um, we've both been part of this kind of very interesting, if you like, wave of new consciousness stimulated by teachers and or their teachings coming from the East to the West and us going, yes, please, can we have some more?
Yes. Yes. And I think what I loved about this practice, it's quite unique. It is unique. Um, in the sense that it never let go, I feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, of its roots, to be a practice that is personally transformational. Whereas I think many other yogas, I mean, from as early back, even here, when my grandfather was doing hatha, he did it because he wanted to increase the size of his lungs. It was a purely physical activity for
Yeah,
him.
yeah,
Whereas Kundalini yoga, and a lot of people still don't really know this, is one of those practices where the meditation part of it is the key component really to it, you
yeah,
know.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's fair to say, or if you like, my understanding of yoga is that the meditative aspect is absolutely foundational and essential. If the path of yoga is about consciousness, which it is, then of course our consciousness relates very much to our emotional body and emotional feelings and responses, and also to our minds, how they work, how much they kind of seem to be working with us as friends, or how much they seem to be working against us as like a kind of a monkey on our back. Yoga is in that sense, a kind of powerful self therapy so that each one of us can be our best.
Mm, mm. And I think, it's true. Something I hear a lot is although no matter what the practice is, if people find their particular style of yoga, they love it and they feel better. Maybe that's all they get out of it. They feel better, which is fantastic. But Kundalini yoga actually kind of asks a bit more more of us. It has a demand of us, if you like. Which is, I think, made it a practice that's people don't necessarily kind of understand. I mean, you might even want to go back to the name. What is Kundalini? A lot of people don't understand what that is and they hear about a Kundalini awakening and that feels like a big woo-woo thing. So let's go back to
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
from that perspective, of course, it had pretty bad press at the time I began. And in conversation, oh, are you into? Yeah, I'm into yoga. That's very interesting. What kind of yoga you do? I do Kundalini. Oh, that's very dangerous. You want to be very careful of that. A great big snake will climb up your spine, and you'll have a psychotic episode. I'd kind of go, oh, really? Well,
Have
well,
you
it
ever
hasn't
met
happened so.
anyone? I've never met anyone that happened. No.
Um, No, well, I mean, I've come across one or two people who who've had unfortunate incidents through their practice of yoga. One through what they called Kundalini yoga, one through I can't remember what kind. But it's rather like saying, I don't know, cars are inherently dangerous. Well, possibly, but if you get somebody who's a sensible, safe driver, then the chances of them having an accident are absolutely minimal. The really important thing about yoga that I'd love your folk to hear is that it is for everybody. Or to put another way, it is for every body, whether that body is 14 years old or 74 years old. It's not about being a kind of a circus acrobat. It's about a person wanting to get the very best from their biosystem, their physical body, and their energy body that are worked on simultaneously by yoga practice. In other words, you can't say, oh no, I'm too old, I'm too this, I'm too that. It works for everybody. You just have to step in and do your best.
And there's a little bit of dedication required, like anything, isn't there? The discipline, all yoga practices
Well,
demand of us. Yeah.
it's like saying, well, if I join the running club I mean, do I have to run? Like, well,
Yeah, good point.
it's that,
Yeah,
do your
yeah.
best.
Mm.
Um, and as you've hinted a couple of times, yes, some Kundalini practices are quite challenging. Um, but there's this sort of understanding that in your life, whatever the challenges are, they're an outer reflection of what's going on inside. And in that sense, yes, there is a challenge to be had. And if you just kind of find the guts really within to meet those challenges, the chances are you will find some peace and contentment and joy at meeting the challenge of self.
Now that segues us beautifully into where we are in the world at the moment, where, I mean, yes, yeah. Uh, and you could say that it's actually been like this. We've always had this going on, but there is I think a feeling of it being very extreme, or the polarizations are becoming more extreme in ideas, point of views. And with that is making life very uncomfortable for people, I think. There's a sense of, how do I do this? How do I manage this? How do I carry on and do this? And really yoga practice, but not just yoga, a spiritual path, I think, is necessary now. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. Yes, I think that. I mean, on the one hand, um, if you look at what social commentators have said since Plutarch or those kind of Romans and Greeks and stuff, they pretty much all said, "Oh, the whole world's gone to the dogs. Everything's falling, everything's falling apart, and the young have no respect." All of this kind of stuff, and maybe relatively speaking, that was the case. I think, of course, the difference now is that we're in what Marshall McLuhan termed the global village, where whatever's going on in your backyard, Susie, in New Zealand, I know about within, a few nanoseconds in my backyard in Sweden.
Mm.
And so, on the one hand, we might think, oh, wow, well, that's fantastic. Enhanced communication. Yes, it is. That's a major plus. But the kind of ambient anxieties that we might have about what's going on in the world are multiplied because we actually know what's going on in the world all over the world. And that, of course, can be a source of great worry and distraction. Now, whatever else a spiritual path is, it's a methodology to find stability, peace, and calmness within. So that's never the wrong thing to do, and many people would say, including me, that it's always the right thing to do. But carrying that sort of image a bit further down the line, what we now have is a social fabric in which terms like post-truth and fake news and all these kinds of hideously deceptive kind of formulaic ways of communicating a particular doctrine throughout throughout social media, all of which is adding to what you characterized as a kind of polarization.
Mm.
And so that polarization is simply becoming more and more divided and marked, and is leading to what would, in classical Chinese perspective, be seen as one side and the other side, yin and yang, getting farther and farther away from each other, more and more divided, more and more entrenched in their own particular doctrine. end result is that the central energy that holds them is getting thin and getting stretched. And that pretty soon what will happen is there'll be a collapse of that central energy, leading to these completely sort of freaking out and having to come back together and reform to a kind of proper balance. Proper balance is here's the yin, here's the yang, bit of repelling, but certain attraction, doing a kind of a dance, but relating to each other in a conscious way, as opposed to kind of screaming and yelling and demonizing one another in ways in which we just seem to see hate being spewed from, many commentators who should know a lot better, but regrettably they don't.
Well, yeah. But as you say, as you intimated there, that this is potentially a necessary part of the journey, in the sense that we haven't clearly learnt a lot about this, because we've been here before in various ways, in various countries around the world, in various, times. And
Yeah.
yet here we are again. And it's a little bit, perhaps, as I said, heightened at this point. And I think there is that awareness sits with the average person out there. That is quite strong, and that's perhaps what they're reacting to, a nervousness, basically, I guess the paradigm is falling apart, and they've been part of the paradigm and it supported them. Stuff has happened in the past. We come back, we seem to sort of get past it, and we come back to it and dance on in the way that we did before. And it's just not really working. So what do you feel is the best way for people on Earth today to really find that peace within? How do they seek it, and how do they even trust it? And I think trust has become a big thing because of the fake news, because of the illusion. You and I have
Yeah,
been looking at this as an illusion for a long time, so we're a little bit more kind of, okay, we're a little more okay with it, neutral about it. But a lot of people aren't, and find it unfathomable and really disturbing. So, there are ways to get yourself into a neutral space.
there are indeed.
Um,
And of course, there's many ways. The way that really both of us have chosen is through yoga. So, to answer your question, um, uh, there's many, many, many different forms of yoga. There will be one that works for every individual. So I think, to answer your question, the best thing they can do is go shopping till they find the yoga form that they like. My strong recommendation to them, to you, is that find a form that includes meditation. And really, this is about us finding a teacher who we kind of think, well, she's okay. He's not bad. I think I can, sit and learn with them, and we do. And then from that, you'll find that your practice of doing yoga, your practice of doing meditation, maybe there's chanting, maybe it's silent, certainly it will be using the breath, will create an energy field. Now, you can call that energy field your aura, you can call it your radiant body, you can call it your bliss body. But whatever you call it, you will find that it kind of creates a link through the limbic system of the brains of everybody who's doing that meditative practice, and everybody will feel connected. Everybody will have an experience of sort of oneness. And all of this, we can say it creates good vibrations. We can say it creates merit. We can say it connects you to a golden chain of practice. But what it basically is a field of oneness. And it's the same field of oneness that is the quantum field that physicists talk about when they say we are all one, in agreement with, Guru Nanak, born 1469. This was his first words after his revelation. Ik Onkar, one creator, one creation. It's all one. So as you do your practice, you'll find that you connect with your heart energy, with your soul energy, that is deeply, deeply satisfying. And that I would see as being the way forward for anybody, the way forward for everybody, if they choose to take it. They don't have to believe in God. They don't have to believe in me. They have to believe in you. They just have to sit there and take a bit of instruction. If they've got enough faith to do that, then they will receive.
You've actually frozen there for a moment there, Guru GD. I don't know what you're there we go, you're back. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And let's just talk a little bit about meditation, because I think people get quite freaked out about it. And because there's a lot of expectation. I'm supposed to go into the state of, you talked about it there, oneness, shunya, we sometimes call it zero state. And they go, oh, 5 minutes, and they're like, okay, I'm out of here. My brain is, I can't do that. I can't do that. So it's become, although there's a lot more encouragement of it out there, it's become like, oh, that subject that people go, I don't know about that, and also the sense that you have to meditate daily. I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, and what it can provide you. And I think, if you're anything like me, I've even with Kundalini Yoga, it was what it provided me that really got me hooked, and what it can give you with time, even more, over time, even more. It's a growth. Meditation, you grow with it, So let's just talk a
Indeed.
little bit about that and what it's there for.
Well, it's rather like, people often will say, oh, no, I tried that. I didn't like it. It made me really angry, or I got really upset. So it's like, maybe some of us could ride the bicycle on the first time we tried. But for most of us, me included, we couldn't. And, you fall off enough times until you get it. Meditation is no different. The falling off will be boredom, feeling upset, feeling angry, as you process whatever is coming up. And that's what is supposed to happen. People think when that happens, they can't meditate. Actually, they're meditating correctly. And you keep on going until you can ride the bike. And that means until you have an experience of, oh, wow, I totally felt a connection with my own heart, or I totally felt some kind of sensation and feeling of oneness with myself that I've never really had before. So even when that happens, that doesn't mean you're not going to feel totally irritated the next day when you do some practice. But the general understanding is that you kind of tend to get incremental, if you like, increases, or incrementally more feeling sensations of calmness, of peace, of compassion, rather than annoyance and emotionalism and negative things. Most meditation forms recommend daily practice, and that, of course, is a challenge, but you do what you can do.
Mm. Mm.
And, it's rather like you create momentum through daily practice. And then that momentum carries you through. There's many different forms of meditation. There's many different forms of meditation, even within the Kundalini Yoga.
Mm. Mm.
There's like a huge compendium of practices.
Mm.
Other practices will say, well, there's just this is your mantra or this is your practice, just do that one. And if that's how you're kind of, if that's the school rules of your school, then maybe you obey that.
And
But there's so many forms that there really is, you it's not difficult to find one that resonates with you.
And why do we do yoga? We do it to meditate,
Well,
because it
precisely.
sorts the energy out, and particularly with Kundalini yoga, you are kind of, it's almost like a technology and how it sorts the energy out to
Yeah,
get you to a point
exactly.
where you can meditate. Yeah.
The sort of the understanding is that the emotional body, if you like, is like an overlay or is within the physical. The mental bodies, and we look at the negative mind and the positive mind and the neutral mind, they're also within the physical form. And so by doing some physical yoga, all of those physical activities simultaneously work on your emotions, work on your mind, as well as the physical body. So by the time you're ready to meditate, you're kind of like you're feeling very neutral, all the kind of, hustle and hassle and like the kinks of the stress and strain, all of that's been worked out.
And
That
wasn't
means
and wasn't that
that
why
means you
the sorry. No, you continue. Can you continue?
So that's kind of like the soil is perfectly prepared for the seed of the breath practice and or the mantra, whatever it is, and or the visualization. And so the chances are you'll be able to meditate a bit more deeply and a bit more clearly because you've done all the kind of heavy preparation.
And isn't that why the yogis, the traditional yogis that we think about, from way back when, uh, did the yoga?
Exactly,
Yeah.
precisely. So it was understood that the human biosystem can be worked on, can be affected through many different means. And those many different means became the basic constituent activities that make up a yoga form. So, of course, asana, the poses, and this is like using sort of the sacred geometry of poses. Then there's the bandhas, the body locks that contain energy and then project it, usually upwards. Then there's the mudras. Then there's the pranayam. Then there's the meditation. There's the chanting. All of these different constituents are used in most forms of yoga, but they use them in different ways. In Kundalini, they're all in it together, so that sometimes you're sitting there doing your yoga and thinking, wait a minute, this is meditation, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's a wonderful practice in that way, and it's so varied, that variation. For someone who's quite a busy mind like myself, it was the only way in many ways to get me there and in the moment, staying in the moment, because I wasn't on autopilot doing the asanas on autopilot and planning dinner as well and putting the washing out and and so it just, you can't because you don't know what's coming next. And
That's right.
yeah, and to that extent, it's for me anyway, that's been quite helpful. It's for, as I say, staying in the moment, and that is, the now moment is another thing that's been talked about a lot. Being present in the now
Mm,
is the only place to be,
mm.
and the most powerful place to be as well. You want to talk a little bit about that concept?
Well, this is one of the sort of one of the basic principles of, as far as I understand it, all spiritual practice, certainly all yoga, which is to um, to be in the now, to be here now, as that story of Bhagavan Das. Ram Das, Richard Alpert. He went off to India and sort of connected up with Neem Karoli Baba, who's one of the sort of most well-known and respected Indian yogis of recent times. Died a few years back. And Richard Alpert had been the friend of Timothy Leary,
Mhm.
as in turn on, tune in, drop out, and LSD, and all of this in the West Coast. And Richard Alpert was always, saying, well, when we were running the acid tests, and I would say, be here now, Richard. Yeah, we will. Be here now. And it's kind of like he learned the lesson eventually, which is that, as you said, the only place to be is to be in the present. It's rather like if we live in the past, we've given up our future. If we're too focused in the future, then we're probably missing the point of being in the now.
Mhm.
And the point of being in the now is that whoever we are and wherever we are, the circumstances of that now-ness are the perfect um, teaching for you in that moment. To see it, to experience it, to learn whatever it is you need to learn from it. Thank you very much, moment, and on to the next one.
Mm, mm. Certainly, in my experience, it's
And
been the one way to perhaps wake up to the past core beliefs that one's assimilated, to see it from a new perspective, perhaps in the now moment, without see the baggage in a different point of view, which is an
absolutely,
opportunity, of course, to let go of the baggage for the future.
absolutely,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely, to, if you like, revisit it and realize that perhaps you don't need at least half of it, so you can let go of it. You can donate it for cosmic recycling.
Yes, yes, very kind how the cosmos does that recycling. It's interesting because that sounds very easy to do, and it's not so easy to drop one's core beliefs because they're pretty imprinted in our daily in our lives, and but they can with time be let go of, or and even kind of treasured as a good lesson, you know.
Well, they're kind of like the training wheels that you had on your bike.
Mm,
And eventually it becomes, there's a maturity when you just don't need that anymore.
mm,
And you can, if you like, travel without that kind of psychic weight. To look at it another way, we all have those kind of deep imprints of previous karma. That's called our samskara. And it's that that kind of determines where you're born in the planet, to, what kind of socio-economic circumstance, what kind of family constellation, because you've taken the decision to, in effect, contract in to the bloodline of which your mother and your father are members. And so with that, you're also taking on a few generations, or in fact many generations, of their issues. And we do our best to make sense of all that after we've gone through the whole process of, getting used to being in one of these in a human form. So from the age of whatever, 5 or 6, we're kind of having to process all of that as best as we can, family stuff. And that goes on for most of the rest of our lives. Many people our age, of course, are dealing with ailing parents.
Mm. Mm.
So this is one of the kind of, if you like, primary sources of the karmic imprint of the individual.
And this is do you believe this is our journey to sort this out? I mean, we, as you say, we come in as a content, we choose it. We choose it. As a soul,
Yeah.
we choose this life, this script, to live out this script in this way. And we make choices along the way. There's free will in there too, but there are a few perhaps themes that are going to be played out.
That's right. And,
Um,
it's like, okay, we can kind of accept this on one level, but on another level, it's rather like, if you think back to your family constellation, I think, why would I have chosen that?
mm,
But, on some level, we did. And then it's rather like, well, what are we going to do with our time? That's the important issue. Um, and whatever the kind of key components of the family karma are, to what extent do we make it our business to help each one of those family members in whatever way they need? Or do we think this is all too crazy, thanks but no thanks, I'm out of here? Once you hit 18 years or 16, whatever the threshold is in the country you live in. Some do one thing, some do another. But whatever it is we're supposed to, if you like, work at and work out, you can't really run from it.
mm. It comes back at you, doesn't it?
Exactly.
And
It
I think
does.
that's everyone out there would be able to kind of resonate with that idea, the looping that we do in our life um, when, if you want to call it spirit or our Dharma, taps us on the shoulder, oh, you can learn this one again, and maybe ramps it up a notch each time, just so that hopefully you might, the
Well,
lesson becomes a bit harder.
that's right. And that's the wake up call.
Mm,
The wake up call is, when someone says, "Oh, Susie, I did this, you got to come. This is amazing." And you
mm,
kind of think, what are they talking about? And, you go along and you have an experience.
mm.
And that's like the messenger, the Buddha pointing. So, and you find your Dharma path.
Mm.
And then, of course, everything changes because you look at everything in a slightly different way.
I like it that you put it as simply as that, because I think the awakening that word gets banded around a lot, that people expect it to be a revelation. But really it can be very, very simple. Is that
That's
right?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Precisely. Yes, for some people they have a, kind of peak experience first time they say Om Namah Shivaya or Mani Padme Hum or Hallelujah,
Mm.
and good luck to them. But for others, it's just, a much quieter, well, I just sat in the room and there was a few meditating and I just knew I was at home kind of
Mm.
thing.
Mm.
And they do. Um, yeah. I just noticed you got a volume of Paramahansa Yogananda there.
Oh, I know. And it's interesting because the only other yoga I've done is actually Kriya, been initiated into Kriya. So it's both Kundalini yoga and that are Kriya yogas, and that's the only other yoga I've done. I've stuck to Kundalini yoga, and it works for me.
He
But
was
that
very
is so
interesting.
similar, really.
That's right. As
Yeah.
far as I know, he was the second yogi to go over to the States. The first one was the turn of the last century. Swami Bhakti, I can't remember his name.
Right.
But Paramahansa Yogananda went over in the 20s
Mm,
and stayed pretty much for the whole of the rest of his life. I think he died mid 50s or something
mm,
like
mm,
that. Went back to India once for a short break, but he was in the States for 30 years. When he died, he caused a sensation because his body remained
that's right.
absolutely pristine, and
Mm,
the mortuary, they'd never seen that before. He established his fellowship, still doing good work all those years later, and comes from a very, very illustrious lineage. This is
mm,
the
mm.
the lineage of BABAji, and Jesus Christ was rumored to have been initiated into Kriya Yoga.
Yes, it is. It's the initiation is an interesting thing because with Kundalini yoga, it's a self-initiation, isn't it, rather than the um, that I got. But both are the same. Both are the same, really. It's all the same message, actually. When you look back at Babaji, Jesus, or all the ascended masters, the message is exactly the same. If they've walked this earth, which is lovely if they have, because it becomes very relatable, their teachings then to those trials that we as humans experience. So yes, it's an interesting one, and I think what's the ascended master? I mean, the ascended masters like um, Yogananda, like Jesus, they were able to reach that neutrality where they could probably walk down the road, and if there was a murderer kind of in the buzz around them, they wouldn't actually even see each other. It wouldn't exist. It's in a slightly parallel universe on Earth when they
Mm,
reach that point. They're with us.
mm,
They're eating still sometimes,
mm,
sometimes they don't.
mm.
And
Mm.
but there's a parallel universe. And I'm very interested in that. I think that's highly attainable potentially,
I'm
actually.
gonna I'm gonna send you a link
Mm,
that a friend and student of mine sent me only a couple of weeks ago. The headline was NASA scientists discover a parallel universe that is running literally parallel to our universe, but in which time is going backwards. Now, I don't know whether you can
wow.
get your head around that. I
No,
can't
but I
really.
can,
It's kind of
yeah.
like it immediately made me think of the one of the
Our time,
practices.
meaning our time, our what we perceive as time, because time is a little,
Well, there we are.
yeah, yeah.
That's what we have to look at. But it reminded me of the practice of Laya yoga,
Mm,
when you spin the sound,
mm,
and when you spin the sound, it makes a spiral, and a spiral has the property of going round in both directions simultaneously, in which the energy moves simultaneously downwards or upwards, which is why you get that kind of sense of suspension in sound and energy when you're doing the practice. And I just thought there was a kind of like a very interesting connection between that sort of practice and that statement that, well, if it's NASA scientists, then, there must be some credence in it.
The quantum physics is coming in leaps and bounds. And in fact, if we want to talk about time, the sense of time that we live in this linear is getting very accelerated, with things getting faster and faster and faster and faster, meaning that people are coming on board to consciousness faster, and in greater numbers. There's the scientific world itself is expanding its ideas about quantum physics and where that goes. NASA, as you say, this. I think it's fascinating. I feel like we're in an incredible juncture right now, actually, and going forward for this, for real change.
I think that is the possibility, Susie. But of course, it's let's say it's kind of marred when you get government saying no, there's no such thing as global warming, when we've had the hottest year on record, and water is sort of, if you like, acting out. So there's droughts on the one hand, but uncontrollable floods on the other, and creating havoc the world over. And that sort of ostrich approach, no, that's not happening, could have very serious consequences for us.
I think perhaps it's not that it's not happening, it is all happening. It is all happening. That's a parallel universe kind of thing that I think, of course it's happening. It's not, one can't deny, it can't be a denier, but it is all happening. The potential is there to have both. Anyway, I think that's such a big subject. We could go on with that. But I want to talk a little bit about the ego, because it's another thing. The ego is something that gets a real bad rap. We've got to drop our ego. And I think this is individualism has and a polarized world has perhaps made that ego pop as the demon within us. But is it? And is it just a case of balancing? Because the ego has a very valid role in our human meaty glove existence, Yeah.
Indeed it does.
Yeah.
We have the ego to thank for our presence here. If we didn't have an ego, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't need to be here. So talking previously about past karmas, the samskara, and then the point at which you were born, whatever, first breath, then we're starting another karmic account of action taken this time around, and then you get the bigger wheel of samskara, the smaller wheel of your karma, and that kind of is responsible for some of the circumstances and story of a person's life. So the ego is, on the one hand, considered, if you like, a sort of an enemy, because it is very self-interested, and it really cares only about my personal agenda, not too worried about everybody else. You're okay because you're my friend, but it's like it becomes like an entity that will lead a person into me consciousness, as opposed to we, us, are one. What do we do about it? Well, many teachings talk about, destroying the ego and smashing the ego and this. And well, really, I think it's more helpful to think about, well, use your ego creatively by using that creative force to, for example, power your spiritual practice. So use your ego to help you do a yoga pose for a minute or 2 minutes that you have difficulty with. In that sense, it's rather like diverting the energy to use it for higher purpose, to use it for creative purpose, to use it for spiritual purpose. And then it's not going to, or it's going to, if you like, uh, tie you in egotistical knots of selfishness.
Mm.
And so, it's the thing of, well, yes, there's some inherent negativity with it, but it can be diverted. It can be, it can actually be used for good purpose.
Mm. And would you agree that when the ego is quietened in that way and it's given a job to do, and a job that's helpful, serves us,
Yeah.
um, is a point where you can be a lot more neutral and less judgmental potentially at all that we see going on around us. That is something I've perhaps learnt and got to a stage, and I'm very closely observing this now, where the extremes have got very extreme, and you've got um, uh, a spiritual movement that's gaining a lot of momentum and expansion, which is great. Yet within that, there's also sometimes a lot of egotistical behaviors, that this is the way or that's the wrong way. There's judgmental things happening. And um,
Precisely.
yeah, yeah.
So, of course, this happens to loads of people who do yoga,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they're a complete pain in the butt because
I think
it's
I
like,
was in
well,
the beginning. I think I was
well,
really that in the beginning.
yeah, it's rather like
Yeah.
one becomes a bit sort of, evangelical about it. And yeah, you should
Mm,
do this, you should do that.
mm.
Now I'm doing yoga. And people, it becomes a sort of, it becomes, well, technically, it leads us to what is called Shaktipad, in which one's ego is kind of expanded. It's like when you do yoga, it heals everything. It begins to heal everything. It can work on many levels at once. But one of the things it might do is sort of inflate a person's ego self. And if that happens, then, it's rather like they might start behaving egotistically. And, it kind of leads them to a point where they will find a point of big challenge in their own circumstances where hopefully they'll overcome that ego. And if they do, then you'll find a person who is well balanced and neutral and able to kind of give good guidance as a yoga teacher.
As you do. As you do, I believe you do. And yeah, and the ego seems to feel has a way, if we let it go, of really fueling fear and loathing in us. And where I see this a lot, as you know, I love animals, and I'm probably the worst. My guilty secret is going online and looking at all of the rescue dogs and and those stories in my heart. But it's very interesting. I do like reading the comments because it gives you such a snapshot of where the heart is in people, and
Right.
I would say often I'm quite shocked at about a good, percentage. Let's even say, 70% of those comments will be, uh, the person who did that to that dog should be in hell. They want to eye for an eye kind of,
That's right.
there's a special place in hell for those people. I want to get hold of them and do that to them. And I'm like, wow,
Yeah, we do revert to
wow,
old
yeah,
style fire and brimstone
yeah,
revenge
yeah,
stories, don't we?
yeah,
Very
yeah,
quickly.
yeah. And we see that playing out in wars today. We see that,
That's right.
playing out in humans. It's just that the news that we get, yes, is it real? One has to be really discerning about that. But if you allow your ego to actually read into that, oh my goodness, that's going to be a really hard and long spiritual path, isn't it? To
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah. It is.
I mean, the ego will tend to lead a person into sort of, we're going to do this my way because my way is right,
Mm,
because I know more than you, because I do this yoga, or I'm a CEO of that, or I earn more money than you, and that proves my superior. It's kind of that sort of nonsense,
mm.
and it creates endless entanglements.
I love that word entanglement. Because I think that is the one thing I often ask myself, oh, it's that, do I want to entangle with this idea, with this in front of me? Do I want to entangle with it? And I think I treasure that moment now because I'm giving myself an opportunity to make a choice there, to
Yeah,
go, no, thank you. I don't need to do that. That's not going to
yeah,
serve anyone or me. And and that's a space. Would you say that's a space, the ability to really choose our um ch to make great choices that serve us comes with increasing your spirituality. No matter which
absolutely.
way you do it. Doesn't matter which way you do it. Yeah.
I would say
Yeah.
that's a sign of spiritual maturity when we have a much better idea of what we should connect with and what we should say no thank you and kind of bless it on its way.
Yes.
And this is, in the best sense of the word, discrimination.
Mm.
And
And
this is
this
part of the sattvic
discernment.
mind of the
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah. Yeah. So a heart-centered world, which is something that we are all trying to be in. Um, it's interesting I say the word trying. Yeah, because in fact that is our natural state. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think it is, yes, it's our natural state, whatever the natural state of, if you like, Adam and Eve was way back when. Um, but of course, recognizing that we have to be in the now, then the teaching becomes okay. How can I show that kind of, if you like, yogic understanding and tolerance for my, whatever my MAGA neighbor or my, whoever and whatever it is going down in the neighborhood. That's where it starts.
Mm, mm.
You know, we
And and it's interesting that that's our goal, if you like. I'm saying that collectively because it is many people. There is a big movement towards that. And here we are in the most heightened state of where it's, as you say, right out here. Uh, so that extreme, I hope it's an elastic band that comes back
yeah,
into that point.
yeah.
Um, and I guess that's what you and I and many others out there are aiming for and wishing for and praying for, perhaps, you know.
Indeed, and it's rather like, we're in effect, hopefully, an effective global grassroots network of meditators, and that meditation practice generates those good vibes, that merit that we were talking about earlier.
Good vibes is frequency, isn't it? And that's another aspect that being that a word that's being bandied around a lot to raise our frequency. And sounds good, and it is good. How the hell do you do it? You know, this is what I hear people thinking. What the hell is all that about? You know, what is that? And yet, there's not a relationship with frequency, if you like.
Yeah.
And what do you think about this?
Well, how we do it, technically, we do it through breath, we do it through sound, we do it through focus. And if we learn to work with those three facets, then we will create an energy field around us and within us that will tell us very directly, how on earth do I do this? And so the answer, if people listening are wondering how to do this, then if they're in New Zealand, they should find their way to you. If they're in Sweden, they can find their way to me. But, find somebody who is teaching this kind of work, who you vibe with.
Mm.
It's that simple. Who you think, yeah, they look okay. And they'll
And
teach you a few things. It isn't complicated. In fact, it's actually quite easy. But the difficult thing is to keep practicing the easy practice. That's the challenge.
why do we fall off? I think you mentioned the word boredom earlier. You know, we fall off,
One of the
or
things,
you
yeah,
know, we fall
we
off the
get bored.
wagon, really.
We think maybe, well, I'm going to go and try something else, and no reason why we should. But once you've found your path, then most commentators would suggest you stay on the path. It's rather like you want to find water, dig a well. Don't kind of start digging here and then think, you know what? I think I'm going to go over there and try there. And you and you end up having like five, none of which have found water because you just didn't dig deep enough. Then you only need one well. So once you've found the water, then great, there's your path.
But I'm going to say, but I'm going to be devil's advocate here and say you can be an explorer as well and explore other avenues,
I'm an
as you
explorer.
have. You're an
Yeah, I've
explorer. I
done.
see you as an explorer. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
it's rather like, yoga, yoga, Kundalini yoga has always been my sort of basic practice. And I've always gone back to it.
Mm.
And I've pretty much done it always. But I've taken several excursions into allied methodologies, my yoga, my Chinese medicine, my Kabbalah, my internal Feng Shui, my shamanic practice. And nearly all of these I've started with healers from those different traditions. But the mechanics of all of those practices are so comparative to one another, it's remarkable.
Are you
Now,
interested
it's
in the
not
common thread, the thread that joins them, if you
precisely,
like? Yeah, yeah,
precisely.
yeah.
So, it doesn't mean that you're not allowed to do two or three kinds of yoga. You can do whatever you want to do. It's your journey and it's your life.
Mm.
But have a couple of people around you who've been on the path for a few decades, and they can help to answer difficult questions that
Mm.
will come up for you.
Mm. And there are those two who are looking for, and this sounds derogatory. I want to say quick fix, but it's a fast track. And in fact, I've always seen Kundalini Yoga as a fast track in a way
Yeah,
for, quite fast track
yeah,
practice in the sense that it gets you into an experiential space quite quickly.
Yeah.
But there are other, what's your feelings on the plant medicine journeys that people are going on with, with indigenous other cultures as
Yeah.
a way to push through the veil, if you like, in a little bit of a sledgehammer way, perhaps,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
to get there quickly. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Well, I think that's a very apposite image. And the trouble with sledgehammers is that, yes, they get you through the door, but then you can't close the door when you come out because there isn't a door. And if that happens, then the person's psyche is still out there and not back here. And
Not integrated.
that gap is where you get potentially psychosis or problems.
Mm.
Of course, yeah, ayahuasca is, if you like, the hip, over the last 15 years, it's become the hip drug. And yes, I think it is. It's like an attempt to express an experience. And, the express route may suit some, it may not suit others. In Kundalini, as you know, in the Mul mantra, we have a word Saibang, and Saibang means self-illumination. And the self-illumination that it refers to is that as a yogi, I could and should be able to generate the neurochemical profile of higher consciousness that psilocybin or ayahuasca or peyote buttons will give me. And therefore, I'm not dependent on, if you like, outside sources. So that would be the kind of standard approach in Kundalini. But, what I see it as a kind of genuine attempt to have an experience in a society in which we're pretty much addicted to fast everything, whether it's fast food or a fast trip.
Yeah. I have to say, GD, I've done ayahuasca twice now, and it is it's not for the faint-hearted. It's not fun, but it was, in my case, amazing and I really appreciated it. I certainly don't want to make a habit of it. I wouldn't do, some people do want to go back and work through stuff through that medium. It's not something, in fact, I found it very affirming, I think, of where I was at, and it was perhaps a lovely touchstone for what I needed at that time.
Mm.
In both times,
Mm.
always in ceremony, really honoring the plant spirit itself. And what I was left with and am left with is a sense of that spirit, which is like a connection I can make anytime I like, if I wanted to. Actually, if I want to tune in to that frequency, that's not difficult now. That becomes a familiar friend, if you like, for whatever reason. But I also saw around me people having quite I had lovely experiences. It was wonderful, So I was lucky. If I went back and maybe it wouldn't happen again like that, I don't want to push my luck maybe, but I've seen
I don't.
people who don't, who have it quite
I wouldn't.
tough journeys.
That's right. Absolutely. I wouldn't
Yeah.
think it was luck with you, Susie, so much as the fact that you've done the groundwork over and over and over, prepared the ground, and you totally get the idea of giving, receiving, being open, having reverence for the grandmother spirit.
Mm.
And so, of course, you have a good experience. Not
I
surprised
did
to hear that. Oh, yeah,
twice, and interesting. It was interesting. It was really thought-provoking and left me in a very good space to really think about things. So that was beneficial, I felt.
amazing. Yeah,
Yeah. So and yes, so it is interesting, but I know that not everyone it is, what the feeling that you once you've drunk the elixir, you're down that road. There's kind
that's
of no
right.
going back
Yeah.
to,
Down the rabbit hole.
yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, you're there. So you've got to see it through in that sense. So that's not for everyone. There's no
Right.
dialing it down at all. You're there. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's interesting. Um, okay, so I'm going to wrap up a little bit, but I really want to talk about a little bit about your healing journey, how and this is down to integration, which I believe the ayahuasca was a very good integration for me. And you've really integrated your practices in such a way into healing modalities that you particularly use. Is there a formula there? Is there a healing formula that you adhere to in a way with all
Well,
those practices,
I suppose the ground the ground rule kind of thing is that the um, the healing phenomenon um, happens when there's a triad, and the triad is person wearing the healer hat, person wearing the patient hat, and the beyond, however you relate to the infinite. So, the field, God, goddess, neutrality. And as long as that is in the consciousness of the person wearing the healer hat, then healing will take place.
Would you
So
see
that's the
yourself as a channel almost for the
in that sense,
spirit?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
in that
yeah.
sense, yeah. And it's rather like the channeling will happen if my energy is kind of as much making the tip of the triangle as it is connecting to the person sitting opposite me.
I can
And so,
absolutely agree with you there as someone who has had been with
right,
you for acupuncture and Chinese medicine, and you gave me a long term, yeah, it felt really long term diagnosis. You actually nailed it on the head, and I didn't know that perhaps at the time, but with reflection, you were like, okay, Suze, your back is due to this emotional state in your life. You want to go sort that out. We can do a little bit today, but really, here's your mantra. Go and do it for a couple of years. And sure enough, in 2 years, it went away. It went away. Yeah, yeah. So you were right. You nailed it. Yeah. And that I want to call it a holy trinity, actually, if you like, within your
well, indeed, yeah.
in your practice is quite special. Makes for a special way of healing. Yeah.
Well, it kind of, it resonates with the Holy Trinity, the triad that seems to be at the root of pretty much every religion and many yoga schools. So, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, the three pillars of the tree of life in the Kabbalah. They all use that three energy, which of course is the energy of Jupiter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Wisdom.
Jupiter,
Yeah.
yeah, precisely,
Yeah.
wisdom and expansion.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and
Yeah.
they used to call Jupiter the Great Benefic, the old time astrologers, brings kind of, the light of and the benefit of healing and light and expansion,
Beautiful.
as opposed to Saturn, the great malefic.
Right. It's always the other side, right?
Oh,
I'm going to just give you three final sort of questions. If you had to sum it up, what is enlightenment to you?
I would say enlightenment is the constant and consistent experience of an application of compassion to all beings at all times in all circumstances.
Beautiful. What do you see for humanity over the next 5 to 10 years? Where do you see us the trajectory we're kind of on?
I would see great geophysical and political change. I think there'll be all kinds of environmental issues stemming from the whole global warming thing. But on the positive side, I would see a kind of a renaissance of people like ourselves learning to work together to provide a kind of a spiritual antidote to all of that.
Okay. Yay, yay. And where can people find you? Because you actually globetrot quite a bit. You are in Sweden at the moment, but you're often and online. So I'm going to put it in this
Great,
where they can
thank
find
you.
you. Yeah, yeah,
Well, I'm on Instagram. Sorry,
yeah.
folks, but that's the way it is. And that's Guru Dharam 11. And shall I tell you the website?
Yes.
KundaliniMedicine.com. And that leads to one or two other websites that I'm part of, and they contain all the activities that I get up to
And
that you
beautiful.
can share.
Thank you so much for
Pleasure,
being
Susan. Really wonderful to see you.
and lovely chat. And let's do it again sometime soon.
Absolutely. I look forward to that.
And I'd love to come on one of the journeys too. I think Egypt's always been my little bit of a calling. I've been there before, but I'd like to do it with you. I think that would be pretty exciting.
You're very welcome.
Okay. And
Big
meanwhile,
hug.
big
God
hug.
bless.
Take care. Lots of love. Bye-bye. Bye.